Yep. Let's check out this video here from Time Goes History.
The First World War affected all who lived through it to a great extent, but perhaps it was even greater for those who would become leaders in the post-war world, as their actions had such a strong effect on their nations and on the Second World War. One such man was Benito Mussolini.
Okay, so this is from, actually this is from the channel The Great War. Indian Idol has more than one of these channels, but this video is called From Socialist to Fascist, Benito Mussolini in World War I, Who Did What in World War I.
I'm Indian Idol. Welcome to our Great War bio series, Who Did What in World War I, today featuring Benito Mussolini. Benito Andrea Amilcare Mussolini was born July 29, 1883. He was named Benito after Mexican politician and reformer Benito Juarez, Andrea after the founder of the Socialist Party in the Romagna region, and Amilcare after an Italian patriot killed during the Paris Commune. His father was a blacksmith and his mother an elementary school teacher. Now, his father was active in left-wing politics and rabidly anti-clerical, while his mother was a devout Catholic. His father founded the local chapter of the Socialist Party and was elected to the city council. He was busy with worker and farm labor movements, but Benito's parents' contrasting views and his father's political activities were a big strain and a source of humiliation at school. Students were seated at the dining hall according to the fees their parents paid, and Benito sat at the lowest table. Later in life, he would often recall bread crawling with ants. As a student, he was known as never the person provoked, always the one provoking. He was also known for his frequent use of knives. After his education, he became an elementary school teacher, but an affair with a woman whose husband was in the army caused him to emigrate to Switzerland in 1902. His first purchase there was a knife, and he would eventually be expelled from Geneva Canton for using knives. He took up fencing and dueling, which only stopped when he became prime minister. I know the knife thing isn't really important, but I thought it was kind of interesting. So, 19-year-old Mussolini in Switzerland. He became a labor agitator and was arrested in 1903, and spent some time going back and forth between Italy and Switzerland. But when he was called up for obligatory Italian military service, he did not go, and he was sentenced for desertion in absentia. He eventually got an amnesty and returned to Italy, but only served 2 of 20 months in the army because of his mother's death. At this time, he was writing articles for periodicals such as The Worker's Future and Socialist Avant-Garde, and even articles for the proletariat that appeared in the United States. He was described in this period as a revolutionary socialist with deep anarchic roots and a highly developed affinity for revolutionary labor unionism. He taught school for a few years before moving to Trent in 1909, where he became secretary of the local Socialist Party and ran its newspaper. Trent was in Austria-Hungary at the time, and he had run-ins with the imperial police. He returned to Italy, and in September 1911 a general strike was called. There were protests and violence, and Mussolini was arrested and spent 6 months in prison. Now, around this time, there was a split in the Socialist Party. A socialist was, for the first time, invited to join the selection for prime minister. Mussolini and the revolutionary socialists thought this was a capitulation to the bourgeoisie.
Right.
So his section left the party and expelled all reformist socialists from their ranks. He soon moved to Milan to edit the socialist paper Avanti. That's where he was when the war broke out. We've talked a lot about Italy's descent into war so far, so I'm not going to do it here, but Mussolini called for neutrality. Socialism saw itself as an international movement loyal only to the workers, not national boundaries. Italy was, at the outbreak of the war, allied with Austria-Hungary and Germany, but Mussolini wrote much about absolute neutrality and the many reasons he felt it was necessary. But there was a struggle between neutralists and interventionists, and with time, Mussolini began to vacillate on neutrality. Socialist parties in other belligerent nations supported their country's war effort. Mussolini still called for neutrality in Avanti, but he was heard expressing sympathy for France privately and was publicly accused of being a Francophile. Critics called him two-faced. He said he had a private and a public self. So, in October 1914, there was a war of editorials between Mussolini and his critics. On October 8th, he wrote this: "I am not a genius, but I am not an idiot either, and I am not ashamed to confess that my thoughts have gone back and forth, been filled with uncertainty and fears. Who in Italy has not struggled over this?" By the end of the month, he promoted active neutrality over absolute neutrality, saying that this was a war of German aggression, and that a party that wants to be part of history cannot be limited by unchallenged dogma. Italian socialists, take note. Sometimes it happens that the letter kills the spirit. We will not save the letter of the party if it means killing the spirit of socialism.
Yeah, I don't like
the first
that.
Fasci, small groups that supported intervention, were soon formed based on a manifesto.
The minutiae and the details of socialism is important. You can't just fudge with it.
And Britain, home of every liberty.
He got impatient.
And the socialist revolution will follow the achievement of national self-determination. Mussolini was actually expelled from the Italian Socialist Party in November, resigned from Avanti in late October, and founded a new paper, Il Popolo d'Italia.
So he got butthurt and became a fascist.
That were
fucking douche.
Anything but socialist. And interventionist Fasci did things like setting fire to socialist offices. The French government, through its agents, gave him 100,000 francs, and some members of the French Workers' Party had the specific mission of pushing Italy into the war against the Central Powers. His paper was also financed by industrialists who saw profit in war, and in spring 1915, just when Italy was headed for war, it was acknowledged that his paper had done a great service to the French government. Italy joined the war in May. Mussolini was drafted, and on August 31st, joined the 11th Regiment of the Bersaglieri. I want to be clear here. By this point, Mussolini was a real celebrity, one of the most famous men in the country. Some issues of Avanti had a circulation of 100,000, and soldiers and officers often asked to meet him. He served in Monte Nero, Virsig, and Jaworczyk, and wrote a war diary for his paper that was a mixture of ideology and reportage. In many ways, he echoed the thoughts of Italian Army Chief of Staff Luigi Cadorna. He thought morale and the bayonet were more important than modern firepower, and that the long list of dead soldiers was an indicator of determination and the right to great power status. He exalted Italian characteristics and tried to define what it meant to be an Italian. He was discharged in early 1917 after a grenade supposedly went off during training. There were no eyewitnesses to this, though, and he had an unusually long convalescence, a few months in hospital and then a year's leave. And historian Paul O'Brien says the leave was so long because of syphilis and its complications. However, strings were being pulled to get him back to work in Milan anyhow. Mussolini turned to fight the enemy within and the growing rejection of the war. He called for giving land to peasants that fought, and Fasci advocated for a post-war technocracy, where the men who returned from the war would be the new elite and run the nation. Britain was worried about Italian resolve to remain in the war. Mussolini said, "I'll get all the war wounded to break the heads of any pacifists who carry out protests in Milan." His paper began to get financing from the British Secret Service, and he provided anti-pacifist propaganda, mobilizing veterans and war wounded. His newspaper changed its slogan from Newspaper of the Socialists to Newspaper of Fighters and Producers. And the fascists were called to paralyze the efforts of neutralists. And the war ended with Italy on the winning side.
Oh, hey, Hunter.
But the war
I hope
did
you're
not
well too,
bring
comrade.
technocracy
Been missing you.
and social change. And the industrialists didn't want to lose the benefit of the wartime economy. Italy was unsatisfied with the land it received post-war, and Fasci di Combattimento appeared, new fascist groups that grew out of the original interventionist ones. On March 23, 1919, the movement that brought them all together, the fascist movement, was formed. And after that, Well,
damn
that's
right,
beyond the
Hunter.
scope of this channel. This was just a brief, well, very brief, look at what Benito Mussolini was doing before
Welcome
and during
next,
the war.
Jacko,
You are
and I
very
agree
much
with you.
encouraged
I'm not
to
Italian,
look
but
up
I
all the
appreciate
rest
the sentiment.
for yourself. If you want to see how Italy actually joined the war, click here for our special about that. We'd like to thank Madeline Johnson for providing the research for this and that episode. If there's someone you really want to see a bio of, let us know in the comments. And if you'd like to help with the research for a topic, contact Flo, our social media guy.
Okay, so, you know, anyone that spent any time, hey now, anyone that spent any time really studying socialism and revolution and coming to really get a grips on the vastness of the history and God, the mission ahead of us to actually achieve a fucking revolution. I mean, there's a reason it's called struggle, man. It's hard, dude. I mean, you hear all the jokes about, you know, meetings about meetings, and then you got to have a meeting to where you have a motion about having meetings and then have another meeting, whether you should have the motion about having the meetings. I mean, that's just one side of it. It's an ongoing struggle. I've often said that I've been protesting against wars since the 80s and have not successfully stopped one yet, right? But keep doing it. And I guess in a way it doesn't surprise me that Mussolini became a total fucking sellout fascist piece of shit, because he really understood the nature of the difficulty of the struggle as a socialist, right? Because all the odds are stacked against us. This is a capitalist globe, man. Capitalism is the economic order of the day and has been for some time, and it was then. And really the allure of fascism in the end is, no, we'll just bash it into place. I will force you to just adhere to my shit. You saw at the end of the video where he's like, well, you know, we'll get our dudes to smash pacifists. He went from, as a socialist, being totally against, you know, participation in the war to bashing pacifists, right? Because it's easier, right? It's easier to just be like, you know, to force things. But what it ignores is the blowback, is the ramifications. You can't just force things to be a thing they're not, and you know. And again, it doesn't make our the task ahead of us as socialists any fucking easier. You know, I'm been doing a lot of research and writing. I'm working on a manuscript. The running title now is On the Revolutionary Project. And I'm really trying to tackle the issues of what went down between Marx and Bakunin at the First International, what vanguardism is, the controversy, centuries-long controversy or division between anarchists and communists over the concept of dictatorship of the proletariat, and vanguardism and central committees, and looking back at old anarchist writings and you know, Marxist writings and stuff, looking at Kropotkin's complete works, looking at Emma Goldman, looking at Malatesta and Bakunin, but also looking at a lot of what Marx had to say about this issue, the back and forth between Marx and Bakunin. And the reason I've been looking at all this stuff and trying to flesh this out into a full manuscript is because what all this gets to the nature of is how do we really, like, if we want to end capitalism, if that's our fucking goal, like, how do we actually do that? It's one thing to say, you know, fuck capitalism, I'm against it. It's another thing altogether to actually implement a successful methodology for tearing it down, for destroying it and replacing it, right? And I think while Marxist Leninists and Maoists get called tankies because I think that they're mischaracterized as wanting to force communism on other people. Whether that's true or not, I think they're all abundantly in agreement that you can't do that now. Like, if you just went and took a bunch of guns and tried to force people to be communists, they just lock y'all up, right? We know that from Propaganda of the Deed back, 100 years ago, and it totally backfired on all of us, on socialists and anarchists and whatever. But the point I'm getting at is, there has to be a methodology to actually undo fucking capitalism, okay? And that's not to say that any of these writers that I've cited, Malatesta or Mao or Lenin or Marx or Bakunin, had a perfect formula for how to do it. But if you look at them all as one symbiotic project, as opposed to like picking a side, I think you see a more holistic picture of what they all thought was the way to do it. And look, some of these people actually pulled off, the Bolsheviks did fucking pull off a successful revolution. Now, whether they maintained and stayed true to the socialist project is, a lot of people question that. And there's a lot of, I think, understandable controversy over that. But again, every socialist project, whether it holds actual nation state, with recognized sovereignty from other nations, like the Bolsheviks did or not, every socialist project is under constant threat from capitalism. We know that. So we have to take that into account for our methodology for the social. Listen, me just explaining all this is fucking tedious and complicated as fuck. So I'm not going to fucking say it's okay that a piece of shit like Mussolini became a piece of shit, because he got exactly what he deserved, was hung upside down like on a fucking bridge while my comrade Hunter Red Black laughed at his ass prior to being born, but straight up, she did. But I mean, if only he'd been hung from the bridge the moment he made that statement about bashing pacifists. Jesus. It's a hard project, comrades. And anyone that tells you otherwise is lying to you. Yeah, it's something you got to be in for the long haul. Excellent. Eco-anarchist. So I just thought, there's a lot of people, you'll hear right-wingers especially talk about, especially like the Dinesh D'Souza-ites who want to pretend that fascism is somehow a leftist phenomenon, when it's without question and demonstrably and verifiably factually a fucking far-right phenomenon, and always has been. But they'll point to Mussolini and go, yeah, he was a socialist, he's an anarcho-syndicalist or whatever, right? And well, sure, he was raised that way and he was influential, but when I can't speak to why this guy fucking did what he did, but he instantly, it just seems like he sold out quick, And that's the only conclusion I've come to. And I've seen other accounts of, read other things about, his transition. And it happened the transition was super fast, right? And that's the conclusion I've reached, is that he just understood the scope of what it takes to achieve the socialist project. I said, fuck it. I'm going to take the easy way out, man. And I'm going to get power from me, and I'm going to subjugate and force people to fucking bend to my will. And he got what he deserved, was hanging upside down from a fucking bridge. And I think maybe we should play a little bit of this record right here. What do y'all think? You like Circle Jerks Wild in the Streets? I like the band Circle Jerks. I like this album Wild in the Streets. And I think we should play the song Wild in the Streets. Click that up there. We'll come back over here and you can look at some young ones. Hey, Shan, welcome.
This is America. Your favorite son. You can't just what he's done. Now wild in the streets. Running wild in the streets. Running wild in the streets. Running wild in the streets.
Hey, FJM Radio's back. We're a proper home for procrastination. Oh, and you're from Brazil. That's excellent. Our comrade Rad Khan, who's on the P4P project, his family's from Brazil.